Well, let's get started, and he'll probably join in as we get going. So I will call this March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. First, let's do roll call. So Mark Boffman, I'm here. Josh Amato.
Here.
Mike Bresco.
Here.
Jerry Norman.
Here.
TC does not look like he's here yet. Karthik Sitharman, also not here. So let's keep track of that. Next on the agenda is meeting accessibility statement.
Okay, pursuant, oh, one moment. Okay, that's better. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 2025, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual Planning Commission meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public and public comment can be submitted. To view or join the meeting via Zoom, please see the options below. Join via the Zoom link https://j.om.us/j/978-97869, or you may join the webinar via your mobile or landline 253-215-8782, entering code 910-768-97869. To view meetings live or on a later date, you may visit the City of Sammamish website, the City of Sammamish YouTube station, or Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Boffman.
Thanks, Amber. Next is approval of this evening's agenda. Does anyone have any comments or changes they'd like to make to the agenda? Okay, that looks like the agenda is approved by common consent. Next is approval of the minutes from our March 3rd meeting. Anyone have any comments about those meeting notes or any corrections? Nope, looks like everybody's good with the meeting notes from the March 3rd meeting. So we'll call those approved. Next is public comment for non-agenda items. This evening we have a discussion about some code related to schools and also our Planning Commission rules. So if you have comments unrelated to those two things, now's the time.
And it doesn't look like we have any callers on the line for public comment.
Okay. Welcome, TC. So next we'll start with our first item of new business, which is going to be a public hearing, deliberation, and probably a recommendation to the City Council related to some language associated with schools concurrency. And I believe Lindsay is going to be giving us a presentation about this.
And thank you, Chair Boffman. Lindsay Channing, Long Range Project Manager for DCD. Let me pull up the presentation. All right. I am going to use the PDF version of it this evening as my PowerPoint wasn't quite working correctly, so please bear with me. All right, this evening we're here for school concurrency code amendments to have a work session and public hearing. The proposed agenda for working through this presentation is I will give a presentation, ask of any questions that the commission may have, and then I ask that you please open the public hearing, accept public comment, and then move on to deliberations and a recommendation this evening if you all are ready to do so. Before I get into the question to be answered, I do want to take a moment to clarify. Schools have come up a lot in the last year and a half. This planning commission has heard items related to schools in the past year. Most recently, it was school impact fees, which although it's in the same chapter of Sammamish Municipal Code, this is a different topic, which is school concurrency. School impact fees were passed and updated in the fall of 2021. So I just wanted to kind of set that as the baseline for this evening. We're not talking about school impact fees. We're now moving on to school concurrency standards and how the city works with the school districts surrounding that. All right, so the question this evening is, does the Planning Commission recommend City Council approval of proposed changes to Sammamish Development Standards 2106040, Development Standards, Adequacy of Public Facilities and Services, and SDC 2109020, Hearing Examiner? These proposed changes are presented in Exhibit 1 of the agenda bill this evening. So for a little more background, to give the commissioners some more information, Council has been discussing school concurrency for a number of years. They gave initial direction in late 2020 and early 2021 for staff to look into potential amendments to pertinent code sections of school concurrency to align with how staff review is conducted so that the code and staff review is consistent. Staff completed this review over the past year and a half and presented two options to City Council on February 8th of this year on how to proceed forward. Council directed staff to move forward with the following. Council moved that staff shall move forward with proposing to repeal SDC 2106040I, J, and L, and SDC 2109020T4 in regards to school concurrency in favor of enhanced information sharing with the city's school districts and collaborative code amendments that facilitate appropriate school improvements. The city has been partaking in enhancement of information sharing with the school districts, and there's 3 for the city of Sammamish. That's Issaquah, Lake Washington, and the Snoqualmie Valley school districts. And we'll be explaining that here momentarily with a flow chart to kind of show you the process. Also, facilitation of appropriate school improvements, such as expedited permit processing, exceptions and exemptions for certain actions, and prescriptive requirements for facility standards would be initiated under this process that we're moving forward with. However, that phase of things will come at a later date. So this evening, we're just talking about repeal of the code sections above and explaining how staff has enhanced communications and collaboration with the school districts. So this flow chart's a good representation of what occurs. There's an applicant has a project proposal. They contact the city. They go through the informal process that the city has, asking questions. Once they're closer to having a project that they'd like to move forward with, they apply for a pre-application conference. At that stage, we are now notifying the school districts, like we do other entities, and letting them know that this pre-application is coming in and that they are welcome to participate or provide any feedback that they would like the city to include in the documentation and discussion at that pre-application conference with the proposal for the applicant. Once that's complete, the applicant can put together their entire packet and submit it to the city. The city then does an initial review of that. Once that package is deemed complete, a form called Safe Routes to Schools questionnaire is sent to the school districts or school district, depending on where the project is located. And we ask the school district representative to fill that out and provide that information back to us. And there's about a 2-week leeway for the school district to provide that information. The city, the next point of contact is when the city issues its notice of application. That's when the general comment period opens. This is a standard process that we already have in code today. As part of that general noticing process, The school district of question or affected is also sent the same notification that the general public receives. This also could include a SEPA environmental review, which we'll discuss here in just a moment. At the close of the comment period, we then go into the cycle of project review and revision, depending on comments that were received during the comment period, and if everything was addressed appropriately for staff to be able to either make a recommendation to the hearing examiner or to make a staff decision on the project, depending on the type of permit that it is being requested. At the application approval stage, an informational notice is sent to the district to let them know that a preliminary decision has been made, meaning preliminary approval. So you'll see down here that this step can take anywhere from a year to 3 years to get through just the preliminary approval stage of a plating process. So this is the standard process that we have. The safe routes to school cycle we've been using, but we've modified and enhanced the process with in correlation with discussions and meetings with the school districts on format and what questions really are necessary, and then also including them in a pre-application conference, which was something that we haven't always done in the past. There's other points of engagement that we have with the school districts. There's with the King County countywide planning policies. It's called PF 19A, and this is an annual district meeting to assess school capacity needs between school districts and the local jurisdictions. This is now changed and is referred to as the PF 22 and is a biannual meeting between the city and school districts. Sammamish historically has participated in these meetings actively, and the next one that will be held is in June of this year, which Sammamish again will be participating in. We also have periodic ad hoc informational meetings with district staff on any items that may come up that need to be discussed. Informational meetings regarding policy and bond measure efforts. School districts will reach out to us and vice versa. And then participation of certain staff members in activities such as facilities advisory committees. Our director, David Pyle, has been an advisory committee member in the past, and I believe he still is at this point, but if that is incorrect, Deputy Director Hildy can correct me on that at the end of this presentation. So that's our current and improved process that we've been following to have better communications with the school districts. By repealing the code, that doesn't mean that we're not interested in school capacity and how the quality of the environment for students attending schools in Sammamish. But there's some other tools in the toolbox that we believe are better and more appropriately suited at this stage, rather than the city determining whether a school has capacity or not, because school capacity at the state level is to be determined by the school districts themselves. And they have paramount duty to provide access for every student in the district to attend a public school if they so choose to attend a public school. And it's up to the school districts to facilitate a way for the student to have room in a classroom. And they have a variety of tools that they use for that. On our end, at a project specific level, we also have some tools that we can use, one of which is the Sibo review process. And Sibo is required pursuant not only to state regulation, but to our own Sammamish Municipal Code, or the Sammamish Development Code at 2109030, unless there's a categorical exemption is met in our 2109030C. And that one really would be for projects of less than 20 units, so residential units, which at the school level for the school district, that's a small project for them to take on students from the project. And we've had this discussion with them many times. But if SEPA is triggered for a land use plating project, then we could use these tools. Typically, we would issue a determination of non-significance if there's no issues, but within SEPA, there's the ability to look into if schools can provide room for the students, and you would be able to then, based on school district participation and comment, we could potentially issue a SEPA threshold decision of a mitigated determination of non-significance, which puts additional conditions through the SEPA review process on a project. This could be things such as phasing of how many units per year could be developed based on what the projected school capacity is given to us by the school districts that they've determined through their capital facilities plans or capital improvement plans that they provide every year. For something much more significant in scope and size, we're talking about hundreds of units at a time, and the school district going, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't something we're going to be able to handle without really digging into this more. There is also the potential to issue a determination of significance by the city through the SEPA process. And that would effectively turn it into an environmental impact statement, which is a whole other in-depth environmental review and negotiated document, if you will, that takes months and months and months as a standalone process before the preliminary project would continue to be reviewed from a subdivision standpoint, which could then provide different conditions that had to be met in order for the project to move forward. Other tools is the WAC 197.11.444. This is the SEPA WACs, and it very clearly states that school capacity is to be considered through SEPA review, as schools are an element of the environment where impacts must be considered. So that falls in line with what I just discussed above. And then there's also RCW 5817, which is the subdivision rules at the state level, and specific to 060 and 110, that requires that both for short plats and subdivisions, that they be evaluated to ensure appropriate provisions are made for playgrounds, schools, and school grounds, and that there are available features that assure safe walking conditions for students who only walk to and from school. And part of this ties back to up here on this page where we were talking about the Safe Routes to School questionnaire and that information that we are asking of the school districts, and we have for quite a number of years now. They are providing us with what school, whether it be for elementary, middle school, and high school, what the development the kids would filter to, and also where bus stops would be located. So we are obtaining that information, adding it into our review and findings on proposals, and making them part of the decision process. So this evening, the legislative process that we're discussing to accomplish this repeal of city code as we were directed by council to move forward with is to hold the Planning Commission public hearing this evening. We'll then move on to the non-project SEPA process and the Department of Commerce notification process, which is standard for legislative review work. We'll then take it to City Council with whatever recommendation comes from Planning Commission this evening. Currently, that's tentatively scheduled for May 3rd. And then the public hearing before City Council and decision is tentatively scheduled for June 7th. So that's our schedule outlined at this point in time. So let me switch tabs here and pull up the draft code. As mentioned earlier, that was Exhibit 1, or is Exhibit 1 of the agenda bill this evening. So the first section of Sammamish code that's would be amended through this proposal is the Development Standards Adequacy of Public Facilities and Services 040 under Section B1, and we would need to remove schools, strike schools from this section if we're repealing the school concurrency portions of this chapter. Then moving on to, oh, is this going to load on me? Let's give it just a moment here, I apologize. going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. Please bear with me. And I will reopen it. Sometimes my Adobe times out on me. All right. Let's try this again. All right. So as we discussed the striking of F schools, and then starting at section I, which is where school concurrency, applicability, and relationship to fees is, we would strike that section in its entirety. We would also strike J in its entirety. We would strike K in its entirety, L in its entirety, and M in its entirety. And then with the hearing examiner section in 2109-020 hearing examiner findings, we would need to strike number 4, which talks about the hearing examiner making an additional finding of school capacity. One thing that I would add before we get into the recommendation, additionally, Planning Commission members, is that our city attorney, Lisa Marshall, who was our attorney this past year, had written a memo to Deputy Director Hildy and myself, and was also shared with council, that the paramount duty aspect of the state regulations around the school districts needing to provide school services to every child in the public system is that there's a large legal risk of taking that could come against the city if we're making that decision on behalf of school districts. And that school districts have the requirement to find ways to house students if they cannot house them in the brick and mortar schools themselves. That can include taking actions such as redrawing their boundaries, adding portables, or redistributing the student populations to other schools within their district to assert that they have capacity for students. Our current interim acting city attorney, Carrie Sand, has also reviewed this and concurred with Lisa Marshall's recommendation that we move forward with repealing these code sections this evening. So with that, staff recommends that Planning Commission move to recommend City Council approval of proposed changes to SDC 2106-040 development standards and SDC 2109-020 hearing examiner rules, repealing city codified school concurrency requirements as was presented in Exhibit 1 this evening. With that, I ask if you have any questions, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hey, let me just, as a clarification, kind of run through what we'll do here. So we will have a period here to ask Lindsay or Kelly or others questions about the presentation about this topic. Then I'll open the public hearing and we'll take public comment related to this proposal, and then I'll close the public hearing, and then we will need to make a motion so that then we can have discussion about it. And hopefully at the end of that discussion, we'll take a vote and decide what to recommend to the city council either way. So that's just a process flow that we work our way through. So at this point, it's questions for Lindsay or others. So let's go ahead. Who has questions? Nobody's jumping right up with a long list of questions.
Yeah, I'll start off.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
So, Lindsay, thank you. And I understand, I think it was fairly clear in the material that was sent out about the legal advice and what's being recommended. I'm wondering, and part of this, frankly, is for the public to understand, what all this means, like from a practical standpoint, if I'm concerned about growth in Sammamish and school capacity to handle growth. So if you could put that in kind of layperson's terms, I would appreciate it.
I would say it doesn't change the way we've been doing review of projects to date. We have a collaborative relationship with the school districts, and it doesn't change the ability for districts to do what they need to do to allow for student capacity within their schools.
And if you could just elaborate. So in terms of that flow chart that you showed fairly early, conversations with the school district. And so that would allow them to address capacity needs or explain concerns that, we don't see how we'll be able to meet the capacity with this development that's going in. Is that kind of
exactly
what's happening?
Yes, Commissioner, that's exactly what it's doing. And it's getting the school district involved even earlier than we had previously, so that they have even more of a heads up, if you will, of potential projects coming down the pipeline, so that they can adequately prepare for that the best that they can.
And if they were to say, we don't see a way that we're going to be able to have the capacity, then what happens?
With the capacity, that's 99% of the time going to happen around the larger projects over the 20 units. So then there's the SEPA environmental process that we had discussed a little bit earlier. And that's where they can provide the comment at that time during that formal stage of the process and say, hey, we don't have the capacity because of X, Y, and Z within the district itself, not just the school closest to the development. City, can you help us with that? And then that's where we would collaboratively come up with conditions, either at that mitigated determination standpoint, where it could be something of us proposing phasing of saying, hey, you know what, the school district can only handle 8 units a year for the next 5 years of your 50 unit development, or whatever the case may be. If it's a much grander development that's being proposed, that's where you could jump into that larger environmental process. And that could really trigger larger things, such as large payments to the district for expansion or potential acquisition of additional property, additions to schools, those types of things.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. That's very helpful.
Absolutely.
TC, it looks like you have your hand up.
I do. I guess as I read through the documentation earlier, and I want to make sure that I understand this correctly, it seems as if the entirety of the recommendation is being made to avoid a potential lawsuit around the city denying a permit to build based on current capacity of the schools. Is that correct? So somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to build X. We look at it and say, okay, yeah, we assume that you're going to build however many number of units. That's going to introduce so many number of students into the scholastic system. And at present, we don't believe that the school system can accommodate that. So we're going to say no. And then the builder turns around and says, you're impugning my right as a property owner. Therefore, we're going to sue you. Right? Is that like, and if I cut it way to the chase, I apologize, but is that kind of what we're looking at here?
I would say that's a good portion of what we're looking at, but the other portion of that and why we're looking at this is because school districts are their own government entity, and they're the ones charged with maintaining and identifying their school capacity needs. And that's not the city's job or responsibility to do.
Okay, so now what we're saying is, for fear of being sued, we're not going to tell people they can't build because of school capacity, but also school capacity is not our problem. And regardless of however many students we bring in, whether it's 1, 10, 100, or 1,000, it is the job, the responsibility, and the problem of the school district to figure out where to put those students. Is that also correct?
not that it's not our problem, it's that it's not our determination to make. It's the school district's determination to make on what their capacity is and what they can and cannot elastically move around within their district. And if they cannot adequately handle the school capacity of students coming in based on a proposed project, then it's their responsibility to work collaboratively with the city to adequately mitigate for that through the development proposal process.
Okay, so then I may be taking this to an extreme, but then why do we have any of the other components within the regulation? Why not say it is not the city's problem, regardless of how much power we can provide to homes? That belongs to the power district. Why not say it's not the problem of the city to look at what our sewage capacity is? That belongs to that entity, right? And just and wash our hands of any and all statutory requirements. I'm trying to figure out why it is that this one specifically is being called out and this specifically is now becoming an issue.
I'm not sure that we do wash our hands of the sewer requirement because we work with the water and sewer districts just as we're proposing to work with the school districts now, where it's the sewer district's responsibility to say, yes, we do, or no, we don't have capacity to service a lot, just like it's the school district's responsibility to say we do or do not have capacity to take on additional students in this area.
Okay, then
if I can add one point to that, if you don't mind, these are decisions made at the development level. Then this is what that code kind of gets us in trouble. We have to remember at the comprehensive plan level, when we do our 20-year comprehensive plan, we're working with all entities within the city that provide public services, and that's under our capital facilities element. So we get a growth target, we get it, and that we plan towards. Well, we plan towards that in partnership with these other public entities, and so that's where a lot of these conversations happen, is at that level, and we do continuously meet with the water and sewer district, the school district, and so forth, to make sure that as development is occurring, we're able to keep up with that with the with facilities. And so it is a collaboration and it is a partnership. It's not the city making that ultimate decision. It has to be done in a very collaborative partnership relationship. I didn't mean to rhyme there at the end, but I did. So there you go.
No, I totally understand that. And I guess, and I want to go back to the documentation, right? So within the agenda packet, new business 3, page 10, right, under 2106040 development standards, section B, right, we specifically call out, as further specified in this chapter, sewage disposal, water supply, surface water management, streets and access, fire protection services, and we're going to strike schools. Why not, in this case, if we're striking schools, strike the other previous 5? Right? If we don't have the ability to say there's not enough school access, why do we then have the ability to say on any of these other? I feel like it's an asymmetric application.
I think that you could leave schools in here or not, to be honest with you, under the general requirements, and still strike the other sections we've discussed this evening, because B, general requirements, is at a broad level. Sewage disposal and water supply, that we get documentation from the water and sewer agencies on, right? Surface water management, that's handled, I believe, through collaboration between the water sewage district and Public Works. Streets and access is through Public Works, and then the fire protection service is indicated through the fire service protection boundary, just like the city is within 3 different school districts boundaries.
So then would it be appropriate to still require, as in under the general requirements, for the school district to come back with some sort of some sort of statement that they can in fact handle whatever this additional load is going to be and have that be documented, as opposed to just saying the school district has to accommodate whatever we throw at it.
So from our conversations with the school district, and Kelly, please interrupt if I'm misspeaking, but my understanding is that at the district level, they are not willing to provide some type of certificate, if you will, of concurrency. They are required by state law to provide access to every student at a public school, regardless of how many get thrown at them, if I use that term. And they just have to figure out how to take that, absorb that, whether it's busing kids to another school, redoing boundaries of the schools within the district, changing a multi-purpose room to being another classroom, adding another portable. That's their paramount duty, if you will. And so,
I understand that that's their paramount duty. I'm just trying to understand why it's not our paramount duty to protect the quality of education in this particular case of the students that already reside here, right? I feel like we're horse trading in that for the purposes of allowing more expansion, we're potentially saying that students may have to get bussed out of even our city, right? Like, you go off and you build a very dense center of housing in the middle of Sammamish where there is no additional property to build another school to accommodate that. You redraw all of the lines, and now somebody that may live on the edge of a line, instead of being able to go to a school in Sammamish, they get bused to a school in Redmond, and we go, well, that's just the way it goes for you. Sorry. Right? I mean, am I off track by thinking that that's a potential outcome for this?
I think it's something that the city has not had control of and does not have control of, whether these regulations, whether this stays in code or not, if I'm being frank.
And to be totally honest, like I understand the legal argument that's been made, and I don't believe that we really have a significant standing on this, but I think that it's an important topic of conversation, right? At some point, we have to put some guardrails around what development looks like and how we control it or don't control it, right? Because it ends up adversely affecting the residents of our community as they stand today.
And I think that comes down more to what the zoning classification is of the various land in the city and what the density is allowed on each of that zoning district. And theoretically, from a planning perspective, that density is already planned for, essentially up to a certain number of units per acre. And the districts have been made aware of that and should be calculating for that in their capital improvement plans and forecasted growth.
Lindsay, Kelly, I always appreciate you guys taking time to deal with me, as I feel like I'm probably the remedial kid here, and I need to make things super simple to understand. But please understand that my passion is because I live here and I've got kids in the school system, and the last thing I want is living out on the edge of town and all of a sudden, hey, great, my kids have to get up an hour earlier to jump on a bus and go somewhere else.
No, absolutely right. Understood, and valid points. I'm not trying to discredit them at all. I think that striking a lot of the verbiage that's in there, I think that that's fine. In section B, as I pointed out, I don't think that we should totally omit getting some sort of assurance from the school district. I would like to see F under, what did I say, 21064040, section B, subsection 1F. I'd like to see that stay. But then if we want to remove some of the other verbiage later on, I'm fine with that. That's my own personal opinion.
Jerry, I think I saw your hand up at one point. Did you have a question?
I don't have a question. I'll wait for a discussion, I think. So thank you.
I would like to maybe Lindsay ask a couple, one simple and one maybe not as simple. I think I understand from your presentation and description that issues like sidewalks and bike lanes and all of that sort of thing is actually handled through the Sibo process. And so those kinds of infrastructure, I know that word holds a lot of meaning for some people, but those kind of facilities get incorporated and determined through the Sibo process. Is that correct? And through the development. So if in order to maintain good access from a new development to a school requires, some new sidewalks, we can require those as part of that process. This really doesn't affect that.
Right, and that's not even just through the Sibo process, but through city public works standards for street frontage requirements, sidewalks, bike lanes. Those are also covered under public works standards. And it's completely separate from a school finding.
Sure, I understand that. I think my concern is that sometimes you can build a new development and require that they put the sidewalk street within the area of their development. And then there's a huge gap, which we see all over the city for 2 blocks, to the nearest school. And I don't want to exacerbate that problem by deleting this language.
That would not, in my opinion, exacerbate that problem at all.
Okay. My other question is, as I was rereading this again, there's an item, let's see here, the page number is page 7 in the packet. It's page 10 of 15. It's item K. It seems to me like that's an odd, I'm not sure I understand why that's even included here. And I'm also not sure I understand why that gets deleted. It feels like it's not related to this topic very well, but maybe I'm not understanding. So it's annual council review of the, basically the reports from the schools to King County.
So what that is our understanding of what that is that when Sammamish incorporated in 1999, Sammamish just took King County's regulations and adopted them as Sammamish's city regulations. And so all of this language that we're proposing to strike, to the best of my knowledge, has never been amended since we adopted it from King County's language. And so that's a carryover from King County code. That is not something that I'm not sure Sammamish has ever done or is even privy to participating in. So that's why that's being struck, because it doesn't exist for the city of Sammamish.
Okay, irrelevant at this point.
Yes,
yeah.
Much better word, much more simplistic way to describe what I just stated.
Okay, thank you. Josh, you have your hand up.
Yes, so my line of questioning is close to Commissioner Labby's. So what is the difference between the water and sewer district granting a concurrency certificate? Why do they agree to do it and the school districts do not? Is it a state law issue? Is it that it's something they want to do, right? You said the district said they're not going to do it. So what is the difference between those two separate government entities in their granting of a concurrency certificate for us?
Well, I would say that the water and sewer districts are typically private industry. They're not a government entity. And so they're selling a commodity and they're purchasing, the developer is purchasing that commodity, where the school district is a government agency, if you will, that's been tasked with the requirement of providing that service at the state level.
I don't know, Josh. I mean, you can drill a well on your property and pump your own water. You can put in a septic tank and leach out your own sewage. Maybe you can build your own house as long as you promise to homeschool.
TC, I'm sorry. The discussion's coming in a bit. This is questions, so let's keep to the questions, please.
Kelly, did you have anything to elaborate on that comparison?
I can't, because that's not, I wasn't prepared to speak to the water and sewer district's operations tonight, so I can't confidently answer that question. I'd have to look into it a little bit more.
Okay. Is it, just to clarify, isn't our two water districts, they're government agencies, they're public entities. They're not, it's not a public-private partnership. It's all 100% public owned.
That I'm not certain of.
Public utility district,
into it more.
Okay. All right. Well, that's my question there, and it's not necessarily important for this, for the decision we're going to make. The other question I have is, can you clarify the difference between the school concurrency requirements we have now, the threshold at which a concurrency certificate theoretically should have been issued by the districts, versus when Sibo were to come into play? So if we're looking at it as like protections for the current residents, the concurrency certificates, they go into play with one house, short plat, long plat, versus SEPA goes into play at what point?
So SEPA goes into play at 20 units. A short plat is up to 9 lots, but depending on what's being proposed to be built on those lots, you could have more than 20 units within a short plat. The school concurrency standards, I'm not sure that there's a number associated with it in the regulation.
Okay.
For the current regulations, is that the question?
Yeah, what I'm getting to is the theoretical protections the school concurrency certificate grants, although it's in theory because it's not actually done in practice, right? There's not been a denial of a building permit because of it. So it's a regulation without teeth. So I'm just trying to understand the difference between the theoretical protections for the residents between the two. I hope I'm explaining that well.
Yeah, I guess an application comes in today because the code is still relevant today. It hasn't been officially repealed, and they're proposing 10 lots per our code. We would do a concurrency review. So we would review the capital facility plans. We would figure out what the student generation outcome is per the number of units and the type of units that are proposed. So if it's multifamily that has a different student generation number than it's a single family. And so let's say those 10, let's say those 10 units, those 10 single family units generate 6 students, because it is, the generation number is like a 0.58 or a 0.35. I can't remember what it is. It's less than 1. So say it generates 6 students. Then we would go to the capital facility plan and see the current number of students in that specific school, and then the capacity the school has for additional students. And we would say, hey, is this in alignment? Is there capacity for these students? If, for example, those 6 students trip and now they don't have capacity for their capital facilities plan, we would contact the school and we would say, hey, we see we're in the red now for Smith Elementary. Do you have capacity for these 6 students? And the school district has told us they will always say yes, because they will create space within the school. So they'll take a resource room and they'll convert it into a classroom. They will put a portable on site. If it's enough where they're like, wow, these 6 students, we're going to have to maybe redraw school district lines or school area lines within the district. They have these tools available to them to make capacity. And what they've told us, it's not the school, it's the district. So does the Lake Washington School District have capacity for those 6 students? Which is why we will always get a yes, they will. It's when you have, say, a major subdivision, right? That's going to generate 150 homes. That wasn't maybe that we're at the point where we're getting really close to our growth target, and those 150 homes kind of take us over the growth target. And so the school district did not anticipate that growth. That's where we're looking at, okay, now we got to meet and talk about a mitigated SEPA or something to address this and get phasing, because the school district obviously hasn't planned for that additional capacity. So that's an extreme case of what could happen. But yeah, that's how we do it under the code now. That's our process on how we check new development proposals against the capital facility plans to ensure there is capacity. And when it trips it, then we're having a conversation with the school, and they tell us, and we actually include that in our staff report. The school itself is over capacity, but this is how they're going to mitigate for those additional students so they can provide that educational service.
Okay, to restate a little bit to make sure I've got it. So pretend the school district at some point says, no, we don't have capacity, we can't grant a certificate. If one new house went up and that put it over the amount right now, that house would be blocked from being built. Unless with a lot of contingencies going into them putting money towards right. So they wouldn't be granted a concurrency certificate, I should say, not that they couldn't be built. So but the new one would be the working with the school district with the SEPA. That review goes in at 20 developments rather than 20 dwelling units rather than 1. Do I understand that right?
Can you re-ask the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. So the current concurrency requirements, that review would happen with a single new dwelling unit.
It happens, I believe, for anything proposed over 4. Is that correct, Lexi?
Yeah, it's for anything over 4. And I think what we're getting confused a little bit here is the difference between the platting process and a building permit. Mm-hmm. So this is done at the platting process, not the building permit stage.
Okay, so the new process is at the building.
Even currently, these standards are for the platting process, not the building permit issuance process.
So it happens at the entitlement phase. So at your subdivision, short subdivision, UZDP, I'm thinking commercial site development permit. That's where we're doing this concurrency review, is at the entitlement stage. When we get past the entitlement, we're not doing it at, say, a site development permit, which is usually your site work, your grading, your building of the utilities, or even at the building permit level. So yeah, that review doesn't happen at that point.
So the current review happens at the platting process. Okay. And assuming there's no capacity, but there's the promise that it'll exist by the time occupancy takes place, then they get a concurrency certificate. And that's at 4 units. Whereas this new one is 20 units, where it goes through the SEPA process.
Potentially, other than we're still communicating with the school at the onset of any project being proposed.
Any project.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all my questions. Sorry that I couldn't.
That's okay. And that's that pre-application requirement. And so that's required for any type 2 application, which would even be a short plat that could be less than 20 units.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So the school is at least notified and invited to participate.
So one other question for you, Lindsay, is since we're getting into some specific scenarios, if we were as a city to decide, that we want to try to influence this, and we had someone that submitted and wanted to do a short plat, and we said that the schools don't have capacity because we wanted to, to do all the right things, what is it we're saying is likely to happen at that point, based on what the attorneys have said and the school districts have said? If we decide to deny that development, or the certificate of concurrency, I guess is probably the right way to say it, and what happens then? Is there mitigation, or what is likely going to happen? What's the likely outcome of that based on what everyone has said so far?
Yeah, the likely outcome, as I think was described in that Exhibit B, but just for purposes of this conversation, is a legal challenge, most likely by the developer, or either by the developer or concerned citizen or group within the community, as to whether there really is school capacity and a concurrency. If the city says that there isn't a concurrency and that gets challenged, depending on the type of project that it was, if it's a project that the hearing examiner gave approval on, then that challenge would happen in Superior Court at the state level through a Land Use Petition Act. If that initial challenge happened on a short plat, which is a director decision, that would be appealed to the city's hearing examiner, who would then make a decision. And then if that decision is not liked, then it would be appealed through the Land Use Petition Act, LUPA, to Superior Court, and a decision made. From what I think we're talking about, it sounds like that concurrency would most likely be made because theoretically, because of the inability of a certain school to be able to house students, not the district as a whole. And especially, I think at the state level, what legal review has come out and said that because of that paramount duty, the district, and like we've been told, the district will say we have capacity within our school district, therefore you should not have denied development, and that's a taking of the developer's property rights.
Okay. And can you just reiterate one last time, the genesis of all this was a request from the city council?
Yes, the city council requested that staff look into the school concurrency regulations, review them, and come back with a recommendation. And through staff review and discussions with legal, staff took options back to city council, and city council directed staff to move forward with the legislative process of repeal of this code section.
Okay. Jerry, Josh, TC, Mike, any other questions for Lindsay or Kelly? Okay. Thanks, you guys. So next I'll open the public hearing and see if we have any public comments about this topic.
We do not have any callers on the line for comment.
One of the shortest and simplest public hearings we'll have had. Okay, I'll close the public hearing. And the process here would be if someone would make a motion, and then we can have discussion and revise that motion, vote on it, up, down, whatever we want to do, but we need to start with a motion. There was one recommended that was in the agenda item. Someone would like to make a motion?
Yeah, I will. So I move to recommend City Council approval of proposed changes to SDC 21-06-040, development standards, adequacy of public facilities and services, and SDC 21-09-020, hearing examiner rules, repealing city codified school concurrency requirements as presented in Exhibit 1.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to make that recommendation to the city council. Discussion. Now we can have all kinds of discussion if we like. Jerry.
I would just like to point out that when this issue was presented by the staff to the city council, they had 3 representatives, one from each school district that's full-time professional forecasters. And it was quite interesting and very informative about how they go about and the work that they do to keep up with everybody's comprehensive plan from all the cities that the school districts serve. And they're way on top of it. And it was just very impressive. And relative to the discussion on the question that TC asked, why wouldn't the same situation apply to those other government entities and or private entities, whether it's the sewer district or whatever? It's, I think that in that council presentation, it was explicitly clear that because the Constitution mandates that these school districts will take care of the kids, it's really not an option. So I see our role as being a communicator and then facilitating it with these developers, places for buses to stop and where they're going to turn around and how our kids are going to walk to school. And so that those ingredients give us some control over the scope of development, TC, as I would see it. So I think we're going to have to use the zoning tools and the functionality tools, if you will, to integrate all the pieces that connect to the school district. And we can deny permits if facilities can't accommodate the children. Facilities not being the school, but the facilities within the development. That's my 2 cents.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the motion. I understand that a lot of residents are going to be concerned that the city's giving away power to control development and make sure schools are have the capacity. But in reality, we have no control over telling the school district to do anything at all, much of anything at all. And this is a toothless piece of code that's just taking up space. And I'd rather us work collaboratively with the school district to try to get the outcomes that our residents want, and not try to force things that just aren't going to happen. So as much as I want to see our schools have more capacity, there are other avenues of doing that. And unfortunately, we don't have the legal means to do that with this. So we should remove it from code.
Mike or TC?
Yeah, I think part of my major conundrum on this is that on one hand, I want to do everything that I can to protect the student experience and protect the quality of life, and protect how it is that families can grow and educate their young here, right? On the other hand, I completely understand that we can't force another entity, whether legal entity, to accommodate anyone in any particular regard. So, like Josh said, having this codified currently is toothless in that we can't back it up, right? And all it does is put the city at risk. So as much as it pains me, I guess I'm in favor of removing it from code, but at the same time, also trying to find some sort of workaround that can ensure, the overall experience of the students that we have. So how do we meet both of those needs?
Yeah, I'll jump in and maybe partly TC not answer, but part of the opinion. So Jerry, I liked a lot what you said, and the fact that the school districts are really working hard to plan ahead is a piece of this. It's not as obvious as something that says in the code concurrency, right? And Josh, you pointed out, some of the other tools, and Lindsay and Kelly, you did too, that help to assure, safe transportation to schools, for example. So the other means to ensure that we have, appropriate growth and it's planned for exist, they're just not as obvious as like concurrency. So it takes more communication to the public, I think. And it does take the kind of process that Lindsay pointed out early on that has communications that are happening pretty early, and making sure that plans are well understood and those dialogues are going on. Again, somewhat less obvious than saying we're going to issue a concurrency certificate. And so for those reasons, I feel comfortable that it can be managed, and it is in fact being managed. And then I certainly recognize the legal concerns that the city attorney has pointed out, and the need to strike these portions of the code. So certainly I started with the motion, and I certainly would vote for it too. So that's the last comment I have. Thank you.
So I would make just a couple comments. One is I do support doing this, and there's a few things I see in here. One is that people, and by the way, I will say I have two kids that have gone through the Lake Washington School District, and one's a freshman in college and the other one's about to graduate from Gonzaga, go Zags. And so, have that experience. And I know that people can be frustrated when in an area like this that is somewhat growing. And a lot of the reason that people move here is for the good schools. But I also think that the piece of this that we aren't really talking about is that one of the big perceptions and one of the actual real problems in the city that we have is the traffic problems around the schools. And this is not the place to try to solve that problem. Now, that doesn't change people's perception that the schools are crowded. But that perception that gets created by the traffic problems needs to be solved someplace else and has been worked on, and it just doesn't belong here. So, if anything, the way I look at this code is that it doesn't really add anything. And it, in some ways, kind of detracts in that it puts the city in a position that we can't do anything about something that we have in the code, and we may get sued as a result of it. And I'm, if we're right, we should not be afraid of getting sued. If that's what it takes, and we're right, then that's fine. In this case, though, it seems relatively apparent that we would lose that argument because the school district will never be on our side. Whether they agree privately or not, they will never be on our side. So we will be on our own, and we'll just end up spending time, money, energy, and detract from real progress on other issues trying to, deal with this. So yes, I understand people will be frustrated about the school situation. I remember when there were portables, and I actually have a wife who's a teacher in the school district, and I know all of those issues. I don't think this does anything to help any of that, whether people's perception of it is that way or not. So we should put our energy into trying to solve those problems elsewhere. That includes development, that includes traffic issues and so on. This is really not the place for it. So I too would also support just removing this and focusing elsewhere. Any more comments? I see some heads shaking no, so I'll call the question. Let's go ahead and vote on the motion as stated. So the motion was to recommend to the City Council approval of proposed changes to SDC 21.06.040 development standards, adequacy of public facilities and services, and SDC 21.09.020 hearing examiner rules, repealing city codified school concurrency requirements as presented in this Exhibit 1. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, no. The motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on to our next item this evening, which is also a new business item. And that is a little bit of discussion that I kind of had actually asked for, and that is related to our Planning Commission roles and responsibilities and the roles that apply. Yeah, Evan's got a little presentation about this.
There we go. Thank you, Chair Boffman, and thank you, Planning Commission. I have a very brief presentation tonight going over the Planning Commission roles, responsibilities, before we have a high-level discussion and review about the Planning Commission bylaws. Just for the record, my name is Evan Fisher, a Senior Management Analyst with DCD, and I'm here tonight with Kelly Hildy. Let me just get screens and buttons situated. Perfect. So first, to serve as a reminder, I will quickly go over the roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission. Chapter 2.60 of the Sammamish Municipal Code establishes the Planning Commission and sets rules for membership, bylaws and procedures, duties and responsibilities, and the Planning Commission's comprehensive plan responsibilities. In short, the SMC says the Planning Commission is to review and advise the City Council on policies, programs, and incentives and regulations involving community development within the city. This looks like reviewing the city's comprehensive plans and sub-area plans, reviewing long-range planning documents like the Urban Forest Management Plan or the upcoming Housing Action Plan, and reviewing land use ordinances and regulations like Chair Boffman's favorite wireless facility standards or the development regulations. I always have to get that in when I can. Oops, next slide. Work is assigned to the Planning Commission through the City Council and the Sammamish Municipal Code. The City Council sets work programs through the City Council retreats, budget process, and the legislative process. Of the items the council decides to take up in a year, those related to the city's community development, long-range planning, or comprehensive plan will be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and items that do not fall within those categories will likely not be seen by the Commission. As you are familiar, meeting materials are published no later than the Friday before the meeting. However, if we are able, we do like to publish those materials early. Unfortunately, due to staff workflow processes and public records requirements, it's very difficult to publish staff presentations prior to the meeting. Current practices for both the Planning Commission and City Council are that presentations are not included in advance of the meetings. That said, staff make every effort to ensure the agenda bills provide enough background information, supporting materials, and exhibits to help the Commission become familiar with the topic and prepare questions prior to the meeting. As always, staff encourage commissioners to reach out at any time with questions you may have. Oftentimes, questions received before the meeting can be tied into staff presentation to help provide a response and a potential conversation point for the Commission. As we are approaching our new normal, I want to touch on the current status of the plan to reopen public meetings. Currently, the City Council intends to return to City Hall this April, but how it'll exactly work is yet to be finalized. It is likely that until the governor's emergency proclamation is lifted, the city will be asking the public to continue to participate in meetings virtually. Going forward, however, all public meetings will be a hybrid of virtual and in-person to ensure the city's meetings are as accessible and flexible as possible. This will mean council and commission members, staff, consultants, and the public will be able to attend, present, participate, and provide comments either in person or virtually as appropriate or desired. City Hall is currently being outfitted to run hybrid meetings, and we will keep you posted on any updates. Additionally, for the most up-to-date information, please visit the link you see on screen. Lastly, I will note that the Planning Commission will be following the lead of the City Council on the timing and practice of returning to in-person meetings. As most of our commissioners have yet to actually participate in in-person meetings, here are a few helpful things to keep in mind as we approach returning to City Hall. First, remember that it's very helpful to get here a few minutes early, especially as we are going through the learning curve of our new meeting processes. Sometimes can take a few minutes to get into the building as well as logged in and connected to the virtual meeting. Additionally, the first few times we conduct a hybrid meeting, we're sure that we'll encounter some expected challenges, so please be patient with us as we learn the ropes of our new normal. And lastly, be sure to dust off your work clothes and dress as if people will be able to see you from head to toe. Lastly, I want to address a few open questions. As you know, we do have an open planning commission seat. We are currently working with the city managers and city clerk's office to begin recruiting for that. We're in a bit of a holdup. As you know, the city council is also missing a member, and that position has taken priority, but we're working to try to also get the ball rolling on our new finding our new commissioner. And lastly, there is an upcoming Robert's Rules training available. If you'd like to participate that, it's on June 16th. Please get in touch with me and I will get you signed up. And then lastly, I will turn it back over to Chair Boffman for a high-level review of the bylaws. Again, this is just a chance for the commission to take a look at what's there. It's kind of one of those situations that if it ain't broke, maybe don't fix it. But if there are things that would like to be updated, now's an opportunity. And as far as the process goes, I'll be taking notes on any potential changes you'd like to see. And then we'll be returning on April 21st, where I'll present a red line version of the bylaws for either approval or amendment. And then the commission could just take a simple vote to approve those when ready. So Chair Boffman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Evan. So I think I requested that we initiate this mostly because the bylaws were last visited about 5 years ago. I don't have that in front of me, but I think it was about 5 years ago. And I hadn't looked at this since I first joined the Planning Commission a while back. And there are a few things in here that we might consider just updating a bit. So for example, if you've read it, the selection of the chair and vice chair process, we've never actually, in my experience, done it the way it's described in here. Maybe that's not important. You guys can certainly decide that, but it is something that's just totally different. And then there's a few other cleanup items in here. I think we should probably just do some language manipulation to get it to accurately depict what we do. I also think, it seems like over the years we have occasionally had some challenges with commissioners recognizing their obligation to participate. So, attendance and participation. And I think it would be worth considering maybe putting some more expectations in the attendance section for ourselves, right? This is us deciding how we want to behave and what we expect of each other. So I'm gonna probably make some comments there as well. I would encourage, if you see something in here you think we should do differently, or something that should be emphasized, then we should make that change. I'm not sure if we need to really do the sort of grammar exercise or not, but some of that's pretty easy to do too, so it's not a big deal. This is really just for our own selves, for the Planning Commission, and we'll live on probably for another 5 years, I'm assuming. So it's an opportunity to just clarify how things get done if you think that there's a better way, a simpler way, or a way to make things work better. That was the goal of this. Anybody have any burning things that they want to talk about or consider how we would change it? I would say the whole chair, vice chair thing is always a bit of an awkward process, how that gets selected. If someone has a recommendation, I think that would be a good thing to suggest how we do that. I don't have a great idea how to do it better, but it is always for every commission every year a bit awkward. So that would be something that I think would be worth addressing if someone has an idea. And anything else you see, it's useful when a new commissioner joins, which is what's going to happen here shortly, for them to have some documents like this and others to sort of provide some guidance about what the Planning Commission is all about and how we work together. Jerry?
Yeah, first off, I would say that when I'm the new guy on the block, so these documents were shared. They were, I forget who sent them to me, but it was all sent right out front when I got the laptop and easily to review. One of the things that I would like to ask about is that, if I'm not mistaken, the process calls for us, when we make a decision, for it to be put in writing and signed by you as the chairman, and then given to the city council. And I wondered if that's happening relative to the visioning process. We had the discussions and people, they said, do you have any comments on the presentation or suggestions? And those were just sent to staff. But have you gone forward as a group and made some comments to the city council?
So I can say that from a formal process standpoint, whenever there's a motion and a vote on anything like that those always get actually a pretty lengthy recommendation letter to the city council that's signed by the chair and the vice chair. For things that are not formal recommendation type process, where we're doing public hearing just like we did tonight and that sort of thing, those generally do not get created. A written document does not get created and sent to the council. It's an interesting, the underlying question that you have that's interesting is actually how do we communicate with the city council? And I think it's a really good question.
I will add specifically for the community visioning, your questions and the project team's responses were included in the city council packet that agenda bill that was supposed to go on Tuesday, but now will be going on April 5th. So we, staff did take all your questions and comments, provided a response, and included it in the material for city council review of that vision statement.
I appreciate that, and I think you notified us that you included those. I wondered if we skipped the proper process that way rather than, I think that as I read this, the commission's supposed to, via its chairman, communicate directly with the council and not filter its decisions or thoughts through the staff. And that's, I just wanted to know it flows.
And I would say that any of those formal letters that the chair signs, absolutely, in that case, do get edited, changes. It does go through that part of the process. The informal stuff, not as much.
Okay, thank you.
Josh, you had a comment or a quick question or something?
Well, I was just going to respond to what Jerry asked, and that this back and forth that we've had, we did it with the urban forest management plan and the wireless facilities. When it's still in this ping pong with us and the council, it almost always is part of a matrix where it just keeps getting added to. And then once we make a decision, that's where the formal process happens. But definitely look at the matrix and make sure your comments were appropriately synthesized. You know, we're all people, so sometimes it doesn't happen. But I would say on the chair and vice chair, I think we need to remove what we have now. We've never done the ballots as far as I've been here. I think it should continue to stay a voice vote. I think it would be helpful to have a meeting with all the new commissioners, because I think we have between 2 and 3 every year that come in, so that everyone can have like a get to know you session before we're voting on people we've never met before, potentially. That would be helpful. And the attendance requirements, it's located in the municipal code. So I think we should pull it in by reference or some way so that we at least know to go look for it there. And it's also pretty prescriptive with the order of business, which I think is unnecessary because the agenda decides the order of business and we can change the agenda at will. So I don't think that needs to be in there. That would significantly shorten the document. And I think that's all I have now of recommendations.
Josh, can I ask a quick clarifying question? You said at the beginning you wanted to reference the Planning Commission 2.6. What was that under? I didn't catch it. I'm taking notes.
The attendance requirements.
Thank you.
Is that what I don't know the reference. I haven't memorized it like some people in your department.
Who would that be? Okay, thank you. I will. I didn't catch what you wanted to reference, but I will write that down. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I would point out on the attendance requirements, and this is really, we have to think about the implications of it, but what I've read is a pretty high bar before there's any kind of action taken or anything whatsoever. And I'm not sure that bar is helpful to the commission, because if someone is not participating, for them to have, I think if I recall correctly, we'll have to look at this to see, but if I recall correctly, there's really no indication of action until there's 4 consecutive unexcused absences. And that's a pretty high bar. And in that situation, that commissioner is really not contributing, not through reasons of skill or in whatever, right? But just through participation. And that's a pretty detrimental effect on the commission. So I think it's worth thinking about whether we at least could acknowledge that we would expect more than that from ourselves, from each other. One other thing too, there's under Article 12, there's a note in here that says a minority report shall be prepared within 7 days of the prevailing vote of the Planning Commission. And I do know of 1 or 2 instances where the recommendation letter to the council has included an acknowledgement of those that didn't support the motion and why. And I think that was actually, I received comments from council members of the value of that. I think that that's one of those things that maybe we don't need to change this document, but maybe we should revisit how we're following what we've agreed to do, because that actually was a good thing when we did it. And I'm not sure that it happens frequently, but we should keep it in mind so that we do follow what we've said we would do.
Yeah, we use we always start with a template and then we modify it as applicable to the issue. And what we can do administratively is add a section called minority report and provide that description. One, it's a trigger for staff to remember if there is a minority that we need to represent that. And I think for the most part we do, but we could definitely add it to the template.
Yeah, and frequently we don't have necessarily a dissenting vote, but sometimes there are other things, that, for example, not to revisit what we've talked about tonight, but there were comments, even though that was a unanimous vote, there were comments about concerns, and I think it's actually helpful to the council to pass along that. They should be watching these videos, of course. I'm sure they're glued to their screens with excitement, but nevertheless, that's one thing that has been successful in the past.
I agree.
Okay, so just to revisit this, if we have comments or recommendations, we should send those to Evan. Is that right? And then you guys will kind of try to do a red line and provide a copy of that back in April.
That's correct.
Anything else about that? Jerry, did you have something?
I did. I was going to ask Evan, you mentioned having to do with attendance. If we're going to, like, I know I'm going to be gone and possibly miss a meeting in May, but if there's a hybrid, if going forward, there's the ability we'll have the ability to attend a meeting, it's very likely I could attend it, but it'd just be from a remote location rather than in person.
Correct. It would be just like you're doing now. The intent is that we'll have a Zoom meeting going while we also have the in-person meeting going. And so, yep, if you're out of state and need to attend remotely, you can just do so at your convenience.
That's great. I think that will help Mark relative to, hopefully, if people, block out the time to attend the meeting, but then it doesn't wreck your vacation, Thank you. And what's the process for notifying, who do we notify in advance? Like, I know the dates, the meeting that I would have to attend remotely. So do we tell the chairman or do we tell the staff? Or
If you want to send, I guess, myself and our planning commission coordinator an email, and you can CC the chairman and the vice chair, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks.
Mike, your hand's up. Did you have something?
Yeah, actually, a clarification of something you said about the high bar with 4 consecutive. Was that it's too stringent or not stringent enough for, you happen to miss 4 that could be excused on certain. So just clarify what you were saying, because I heard one thing, but I thought you were saying something else.
So yeah, let me try to make, if you read it, what it says is that essentially no one takes any action of any kind until someone has 4 consecutive unexcused absences. So to me, the bar for taking action is set pretty high, because if you have 4 consecutive unexcused, we've already done an awful lot without you, and it's pretty late in the game to be doing anything. Now, what it should look like that would be different, I'm not sure, but I certainly think that the intent has never been and shouldn't be that when someone's on vacation and they let everybody know in advance that they're going to be gone, fine, right? Then people have the opportunity to plan. That's normal, respectful behavior. But when people, I have people that will have texted me at the last moment 5 minutes before the meeting's going to start and say, I'm not going to be there. Well, if we need to have a quorum and somebody else is on vacation, we can be in a kind of a tight spot at that point.
Yeah.
So there may be a need to clarify those expectations and what, how that might work, I think.
Yeah. Well, you could miss conceivably like 3/4 of the meetings, but not 4 consecutive. And at that point, you're not really contributing in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So yeah, a little tricky to figure out the exact wording to put that in to say when some action should be taken, but that's the point. Yeah. Hey, one other thing maybe for consideration, Paul Stickney sent over, as he's always so good at doing things, I guess some of the equivalent or somewhat the equivalent for city council. And in that it had about using Robert's rules. And then there was a portion in there that kind of elaborated about discussion that I thought, if I understand Robert's rules correctly, kind of gave an additional, I guess, set of guidelines, at least, for the debate and how that would progress. And that might be worth considering. It seemed like, in contentious kinds of, issues we might be dealing with, that would be a way to put some guardrails on those conversations.
Sure. I missed that in Paul's comments. I'll look back at that. Okay. Oh, TC, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of piggyback on the 4 consecutive missed meetings thing. And as everybody has said, 4 consecutive meetings, depending on the frequency of meeting, could be a very statistically large portion of the time not present, right? I would say, if it was me, I would say something like 4 unexcused meetings throughout a commissioner's term, right? Because multiple consecutive meetings shows kind of a pattern of negligence, right? And I think we all understand that things come up and we live real lives kind of outside of this and stuff happens. But, if you miss kind of 2 meetings and you're incommunicado, I really think that we need to be, figuring out whether or not that commissioner is viably still interested in this, right? Because 2 meetings as we're moving right along, that's a month without hearing from somebody, right? And the speed at which we move, I don't know that we have the time to let it go 4 consecutive meetings. That's just my opinion. And as Dennis Miller said, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong.
Kelly, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to just read the code section in SMC 2.60.020, subsection 2, it's removal. And this is the reference and Mark, were the Planning Commission chairperson or acting chairperson shall report inadequate performance of duties of a member to the city council. Members may be reasons including inefficiency, neglect of duty, 4 or more consecutive unexcused absences, conflict of interest, or, sorry, this word I have a hard time with, malfeasance in office. Yes, thank you. It does not, I can never pronounce that word. Notice of the change and of the hearing shall be given by mail directed to the residents of the member at least 10 days before the date of the city or of the council hearing. So it's not just the 4 consecutive days, but it also is inefficiency, neglect of duty. And so what defines neglect of duty? And I don't think that's codified. So, maybe framing that up in the bylaws, a hearing with the city council, that's not a comfortable situation. But ultimately, if we have a planning commissioner who isn't performing their duty as a planning commissioner, that, there are ways of pursuing that. If they choose not to step down at their own accord.
Yeah, and I would say if nothing else, putting some of that into the language here makes it clear, right? There's no opinion. If we put something a little bit firmer in there, then it's not about, what I think or you think or somebody thinks. It's what we've said.
Yep.
Josh, did you have something?
Just that we should clarify the process by which an absence becomes excused. Because without that, it's hard to have an unexcused one.
Yeah, and I do like, I know it says in here something about notifying by like 4:30 the day before or something. I don't have that pulled up here on my screen at this moment, but we should look at that too and say, is that really sufficient? Only because there are times when we need to make sure that we have a sufficient number of commissioners available to accomplish the business that's on the agenda. And so like right now, since we're down one person, it makes it much more challenging if folks are gone. Okay, anyone else? I think that's actually useful discussion. So if we can get the comments into Evan, we'll maybe clean that up a little bit. Thank you very much.
This is sort of a norm, I guess, maybe more of a question. I'll admit, I don't go into my Sammamish email like daily, or I do, several days before these meetings, and certainly when the agenda comes up and so forth. And that seems to be like it's okay. I don't feel like I've really missed things. Maybe there was one time that Amber was asking something about, like, I don't know, maybe it was Robert's Rules back in the early days. So this is more of a question, and maybe, Kelly or Evan, you may have some input into this in terms of like what would be a reasonable frequency for checking communications from, the planning department. And that's why that's a general question for me for now, but maybe that also can go into a norm just as far as, kind of routine checks of email, that type of thing.
Kelly, do you have a recommendation?
I don't have a recommendation. I will just provide this information to the Planning Commission. When it's urgent, like we need to get a hold of you, we will make every effort. We won't just rely on email. We'll call you. We'll leave a message saying, hey, we have a situation. Please check your email. We're going to be sending out information to you, because we do know as a Planning Commission that you probably aren't checking every day, because you're probably not getting that frequency of emails that, say, our city council or staff are getting. But we do our best to call you if we like, hey, heads up, something's coming your way.
We got one or two of those, and they've been appreciated. Yeah. So thank you,
Jerry.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about people submitting information. Right now, it seemed like, I'm going to talk, Mr. Stickney is quite frequently offers information for us to read, or wants us to read information, but there's a deadline that's just before the meeting. And I wondered if we could consider saying, if you're going to submit something in writing to the council, it's got to be a couple days ahead of time, or, can we back that up so we really have time? It's in his best interest, as well as anybody else's, to give us time to read what they want, rather than to say, here's 15 PDFs and it's, 50 minutes before the meeting. And that's not, I just think it could, if we're allowed to do that. I don't know if there's a public meeting rule that preempts it.
We need to look into that, because I don't know if that was to provide the community as much time as possible to get public comment. But I hear what you're saying, because when you get a lot of information, it's not realistic that a commissioner is going to be able to read it before the meeting. So I think we need to look and say, is that actually a rule somewhere? And if not, then I think that's definitely something to consider as part of updates to the bylaws.
Does the city council have the same problem or challenge, I should say?
Yes, they do.
Do they have the same time requirement?
They do.
Okay.
You might look into what Issaquah's doing. I think They require, their deadline for public comments is with more lead time before their meetings. I seem to recall that from some months ago. So,
Okay.
Speaking of that, one other thing too, I'm sorry, there has been discussion in the past about the duration of public comment. The non-agenda is 3 minutes and agenda related is 7 minutes. I've never really found that to be particularly bothersome in terms of needing to be more or less. It seems like it works. There have been a few times on topics like my favorite, the wireless code, where 7 minutes was probably a bit much, but those are unusual, right? Those are not very common when we have so many people repeating the same thing, sort of thing, that 7 minutes is really any kind of an issue. So, but I know that there have been commissioners in the past that have commented on that. So I would just say that is certainly could be open for some discussion if you're thinking about it and think we should change it.
And FYI, our public comment time limits are different from city council. So they do differ.
Okay.
So Mark, I do have one thing for the commission. We could send the bylaws in a Word document out to your emails so you check them. If that helps provide, provide you the ability to add comments or suggestions. If it's easier to do that than on a PDF, we can definitely do that if you request so. Does that sound like something you'd want?
I think I see some heads nodding.
I see Josh's head nodding, so I think that's a good indication. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that.
Okay, perfect. We'll do that.
Thanks. Okay, next is, speaking of which, is public comment. So we had a public hearing about the rules related to school concurrency. So the agenda related public comment tonight would be about the discussion we just had. So do we have anyone for agenda related public comment?
We do not have any callers.
Wow. Okay.
This has never happened before for me.
It's St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, everybody's having their corned beef or whatever they're doing.
There are priorities, I guess, right?
All right, I'll check with Evan and Kelly if there's any other business, or do we need to review anything on the calendar?
No, except for we did add a second meeting to discuss the bylaws, and that is happening on April
21st.
21st.
So that is a change. And I think we did end up moving the critical areas review out to either the end of May or beginning of June. So just a FYI eye on that one too, but it's coming to you. So don't worry.
Okay, thanks for that. Anything else from anyone? If not, if someone could move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, and I also appreciate everyone's patience with me.
Wait till we're in person, then it'll be even better.
I expect that a lot of things are going to get thrown at me.
It's all under the dais.
That's how it works at home.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Enjoy your St. Patrick's Day activities if you're so inclined. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Evan and Kelly, too. Thank you.